The first warning did not come from the sky. It came from a tin cup beside a small boy's bed. October 1887. Wyoming Territory. 6-year-old Wesley Whitmore reached for his water before the sun was up. His fingers touched something hard. A skin of ice stretched across the top like a lid nobody had asked for. He broke it with one finger. The sound was small. In the corner of the one-room cabin, his mother stood by the iron stove, watching. She did not speak. She fed another split log into the flame. The fire jumped, and still, cold air slipped between the wall timbers and moved across the floor around her boots. Cordelia Whitmore was 35 years old. She had been a widow for 14 months. And she had just understood something that would change everything. Winter had not truly started yet. That was the problem. By noon that day, she made a decision that would give the whole settlement something to laugh about for months. A decision that one man in Bitter Fork would swear to stop with his own 2 hands. A decision that would, before the season ended, save 13 lives inside walls the town had called foolish. But that October morning, she only knew one thing. She would not lose her son to another Wyoming winter. Wesley Whitmore held the broken skin of ice on the tip of his finger. He was 6 years old. He had brown hair that stuck up in the back no matter what his mother did with a comb. He had a scar on his knee from falling out of the hayloft last summer. And he had never, in his short life, seen ice inside the house before winter had properly begun. He held it up toward the lamp, caught the light. It looked pretty. It looked like a small piece of window glass. Mama. Cordelia did not turn from the stove. Mama, look. She turned then. She saw the ice. She saw her son's small hand. She saw the tin cup on the pine table beside his bed. And in one breath, she understood everything the winter was about to do to them, if she did nothing. She said, "Get dressed." She did not say what she was thinking, because what she was thinking was this: that last February, she had burned a kitchen chair, not for warmth, for survival, that she had watched her son shiver under 3 quilts and still shake, that she had held his small hand at 3 in the morning and prayed she was wrong about the cold blue color under his fingernails, that she had promised herself, never again, never again, never again. And now it was October, and there was already ice in the cup. Wesley dressed, slowly, because he was 6, and his fingers were small, and the wool made his skin itch. Cordelia turned back to the stove. She fed it another log. The flame jumped, the heat rose. It went straight up toward the roof beams, and it disappeared through the gaps she could see, and the gaps she could not. She looked at the walls. She looked at the door. She looked at the space beneath the door, where the light of the morning showed like a bright thin line. The cabin was already losing. Josiah Whitmore had been dead 14 months. He had built this cabin the spring Wesley was born, in a hurry the way every man in Bitter Fork built. Pine logs, steep roof, big stove. Hope was not insulation. Josiah had died on a Tuesday in August. A freight wagon overturned on the pass road east of town. 2 men were riding on the box. One survived. Josiah did not. The wagon had been carrying flour, 2,000 pounds of it, and Cordelia was told this because she asked. She did not know why she asked. 14 months later, she still remembered the answer. Flour, 2,000 pounds of flour. Her husband's chest, crushed under 2,000 pounds of flour. She did not cry at the burial. She cried 3 months later, in April, alone in the barn, when she found his winter gloves hanging on a nail. Wesley did not remember much about his father. He was 5 when it happened. He remembered the sound of boots on the porch. He remembered his father calling him Little Chief. He remembered his father smelling like tobacco and horses. That was all a 6-year-old could keep. Cordelia was 35 years old. She had been born in a mining camp in Colorado, to a stonemason father and a schoolteacher mother, both dead now. She had married Josiah at 22. She had come north with him because he wanted land, and land in Wyoming was cheap for a man willing to break his back. He had broken his back. He had also broken his ribs, his collarbone, his skull, and both of his hands, all in one wagon roll on a Tuesday in August. Cordelia poured coffee. Wesley climbed onto the bench. She set the cup in front of him. Small cup, no ice. He drank. He watched her over the rim. "Mama." "Yes. You look like you're going to do something." Cordelia almost laughed. Almost. Because he was 6. And already he knew her face. She said, "I might." "What?" "Something." "Something what?" "Eat your bread." He ate his bread. But he kept watching her, over the rim of the cup, and she felt his eyes on her, while she stared at the space under the door, where the morning light came in like a thin, bright warning. She thought about her father. She had not thought about her father in months. But the ice in the cup had done something to her. It had opened a door she had kept closed. And now, standing in her kitchen at 7 in the morning in October 1887, she was thinking about a man who had been dead 9 years, who had built mining shelters in the Colorado high country, when she was a child, who had taught her, without meaning to, that a wall could do more than hold up a roof. A wall could hold heat, if you built it right. She set down the coffee pot. She said, "Wesley." "Yes, Mama. After breakfast, we're going for a walk." "Where?" "Up the ridge." Wesley chewed. He swallowed. He looked past her at the window, at the low rocky shelf that rose behind their house, the one where nothing grew but dead grass and sagebrush. "Why the ridge?" Cordelia did not answer right away. Because the answer was too big for a 6-year-old. Because the answer was, "Because your father is dead, and I am not going to bury you next to him, and there is a book in the cedar chest that your grandfather wrote, and I am going to build us a house that will not lose." She said, "Because I want to show you something." He nodded. He was 6. He did not need more than that. The cedar chest sat under Cordelia's bed. Josiah had built it as a wedding gift. Not the wedding they had, the wedding Cordelia had wanted, in a church with her mother alive to see it. The wedding they actually had was in a courthouse in Denver on a Wednesday with 2 strangers as witnesses. The chest was built later in apology. She had never told him it was accepted. She had never told him a lot of things. Cordelia knelt on the pine floor. She lifted the lid. Inside was her wedding dress, folded and yellowing, her mother's Bible, a tin box of letters, a pair of Josiah's boots, the good ones, that she had never been able to give away, and underneath everything, wrapped in oilcloth, was the notebook. She lifted it out. The oilcloth was soft with age. The book inside was smaller than her hand, dark leather, cracked at the corners. She untied the string. She opened it. Her father's handwriting. Small, precise, angled slightly to the right. Notes in pencil. Drawings in ink. Diagrams of walls, of foundations, of fireplaces cut into rock. Notes on drainage. Notes on wind. Notes on how the sun moved across a hillside in December. She turned the pages slowly. She had not looked at this book in 12 years. But she remembered every drawing. Wesley came in from the kitchen. He stood in the doorway. He watched her. "What's that?" "Your grandfather's book." "The one who built things?" "Yes." "Can I see?" She nodded. He came and sat beside her. She held the book so he could see. She turned to a page in the middle, a drawing of a house. Long half of it disappearing into a hillside. Wesley studied it. He was 6. He did not know architecture. He did not know engineering. He did not know anything about drainage or thermal mass or fire draw. He knew what he saw. He said, "That house looks like it's hiding." Cordelia looked at him. For a long moment, she did not speak. Then she said, "Yes, that's exactly what it's doing." The ridge rose behind the house at a shallow angle. Sagebrush, dead grass, loose scree, and underneath it all the good stone, sandstone in flat plates, some of it as thick as a man's arm, some of it thin as a hand. Cordelia walked with Wesley beside her. She carried a hammer in her left hand and a length of rope, over her shoulder. Wesley carried nothing. They climbed until they reached the shelf. She stopped. She set the hammer against a flat piece of sandstone. She tapped. A clean crack answered. Wesley watched. She tapped again, harder. A piece the size of a supper plate broke away and slid into her hand. She held it out to him. He took it. He turned it over. He weighed it on his palm. Heavy. Yes. What is it for? It's for building a house. Wesley looked at the stone in his hand. Then he looked up the ridge at all the other stones, at the whole cold gray shelf running along the top of the hill. Then he looked back down at their little pine cabin below, with its steep roof and its thin white smoke. He said, "You mean out of that?" "Yes." "A whole house?" "Yes." "But Mama." "Yes." "Stone houses are cold." Cordelia crouched beside him. She placed her hand over his, the one holding the stone. She said, "That's what everyone thinks. Isn't it true?" "It depends how you build it." She opened the notebook. She showed him the drawing again. "Your grandfather built houses like this in Colorado, in the high country, where the winters were longer than ours, where the cold was worse. Did they stay warm?" She looked at the cabin below them. The pine roof, the smoke going straight up. She said, "We're going to find out." Wesley did not answer. He looked down at the stone in his hand. Then he looked up at his mother. Then he said, in the small serious voice that 6-year-olds use when they are making an adult decision, "Okay." That was all he said. "Okay." Cordelia's throat closed for a second. She stood. She did not let him see her face. She said, "Come on, let's go home." Word got to Bitter Fork by Saturday. That was how word worked in a place like Bitter Fork. On Monday, Cordelia walked to the ridge with a hammer. On Tuesday, she and Wesley began marking the foundation with wooden stakes. On Wednesday, the mail rider passed the house on his way south and saw the stakes. On Thursday, he told the woman at the post office. On Friday, the woman at the post office told a rancher's wife. And on Saturday, Silas Vaughn walked into the general store in the middle of the afternoon when the store was full. He did not lower his voice. He said, "Did any of you hear what the Whitmore widow is doing?" The men at the counter turned. Silas Vaughn was a large man. Not tall, white. He had shoulders like a wagon axle and a beard that reached the second button of his coat. He owned the largest ranch west of the Fork. He owned 3/4 of the cattle in the valley. He owned, in effect, the town council because 2 of the 4 men on it owed him money. He owned a lot of things. He did not own patience. The man behind the counter said, "What's she doing?" "Building a stone house." "A what?" "A stone house. Rocks. From the ridge. She and that little boy of hers." The store went quiet. Someone laughed. Not a mean laugh. Confused one. Silas did not laugh. He said, "I want you to hear me say this, because I want you to remember I said it." Every eye in the store was on him. If that woman finishes what she has started, that little boy will be dead by Christmas. I have seen stone houses. My cousin built one in Nebraska, cold as a grave in December. 2 children of his died in it. Died. In their beds. Their mother woke up and found them stiff. The store stayed quiet. Silas continued, "I am not going to stand by and watch it happen here. That widow is going to kill her child, and she is going to shame this whole valley by doing it. And I am telling you right now." He put his hand flat on the counter. "If she finishes those walls, I will pull them down myself. Before winter takes her boy. I will do it with my own 2 hands. Nobody spoke. The clerk cleared his throat. He said, "Silas." "What?" "That's a hard thing to say." Silas turned to look at him. "It's a harder thing to bury a 6-year-old. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once and went still. For a long moment, nobody in the store spoke. Then a man near the window, an older man named Amos Kettering, said quietly, "He's not wrong to worry." Nobody argued. But nobody agreed either, because Silas Vaughn had a way of being right in a way that made you feel like you had lost something even before you knew what it was. By Sunday evening, everyone in Bitter Fork knew. By Monday morning, 3 ranchers had ridden out to the Whitmore place, one after another, on separate errands they had invented on the spot, just to see the stakes with their own eyes. Cordelia knew they were coming. She did not stop working. She stood on the ridge in a wool coat that had belonged to her father. She swung a small pickaxe. Wesley loaded flat pieces of sandstone onto a wooden drag sled. The sled was one Josiah had built for hauling firewood. It squeaked when it moved. Wesley pretended it was a horse. He named it Pilot. He whispered, "Come on, Pilot," every time he leaned into the rope. Cordelia let him whisper, because she did not know how many more mornings there would be when her son could still play at being a boy in a field. By the end of the first week, her hands looked like they belonged to a person 20 years older. The skin across her knuckles had split in 3 places. She had wrapped strips of muslin around each split. The muslin was already stained brown. Wesley's shoulders were worse. The rope of the sled had rubbed through his shirt in 2 places. She had not noticed until Wednesday, when she was helping him take off his coat before supper, and she saw the raw pink skin. She had frozen. He had said, "It doesn't hurt." She had said, "Take off your shirt." He had taken off his shirt. She had bathed the raw places with warm water. She had rubbed them with lard. She had sewn a folded flannel patch to the inside of the shirt at each shoulder to pad the rope. Then she had gone into the barn and cried for 4 minutes. Then she had come back in and made supper. Wesley never asked about the 4 minutes. He was 6, but he was also his father's son. And he knew. The neighbors came in 1s and 2s. Amos Kettering came first, the older rancher with the white beard. He rode up on a chestnut mare on the 2nd Tuesday. He did not dismount. He looked at the stakes. He looked at the small pile of stone. He looked at Cordelia standing there with her split knuckles. He said, "Ma'am." She said, "Mr. Kettering." He said, "You know what Silas said in the store?" "I heard." "He's a man who does what he says." "So am I." Amos Kettering blinked. Because Cordelia had said "man," she had said it on purpose. And because she had said it, he had heard something he had not expected to hear. He had heard, for a moment, that this widow woman standing in the October wind with a pickaxe was not, in fact, a widow woman. She was something else, something he did not have a word for. He tipped his hat. He said, "You have neighbors. If you need them." Then he rode off. Cordelia watched him go. She did not know if he had meant it. She was not sure she cared. By the end of the 2nd week, the foundation was set. The lower course of stone was laid. Cordelia's father's notebook had a section on mortar. She followed it. She mixed clay and sand and a little lime, and she pressed each stone into the mixture, and she scraped the excess with a flat knife. The work was slow. The work was slow the way growing a child was slow. You could not see it happening. But if you left it and came back a day later, something had changed. Wesley learned the mixing. He was not strong enough to lift the stones. But he could turn the paddle in the bucket, and he could hand her the small pieces, and he could sit beside her when she rested and read out loud from the notebook. He was 6. He could barely read. But he could sound out the words. "Wall shall be no less than 18 inches at the base." Very good. What is a base? The bottom part, where it sits on the ground. Ours is thicker. Yes. Why? Because the wind here is worse than the wind in Colorado. How do you know that? Cordelia paused. She said, "Because your father told me." Wesley considered this. He said, "Papa knew about wind?" "Papa knew about a lot of things." Wesley nodded. He turned back to the notebook. He read, "The fireplace shall be narrow and deep, not wide and shallow." He looked up. "Why?" Cordelia sat back on her heels. She said, "Because a wide fire makes you warm fast. A narrow fire makes the wall warm slow, and the wall stays warm longer than the fire." Wesley thought about this. He said, "So the wall does the work at night." Cordelia looked at her son. 6 years old, sitting in the dirt, reading her dead father's notebook. She said, "Yes, exactly." The knock came on a Friday. Cordelia had not slept well the night before. She had lain awake listening to the wind. She was making bread when the knock came. 2 knocks. Firm. Not loud. She wiped her hands. She opened the door. An old woman stood on the step. Small, thin, gray hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. A black dress under a dark green coat. In her right hand, a wooden box the size of a large loaf. In her left, a walking stick with a brass tip. Cordelia knew her. Everyone in Bitter Fork knew her. Hattie Doyle, 60 years old, widow, lived alone on the eastern edge of the settlement, in a small stone and timber house that her husband had built and that she had refused to leave when he died. She was known in the town for 2 things. 1, she walked in the hills alone, for hours, sometimes for a whole day. She would leave her house at dawn and return at dusk, and no one ever asked what she did out there, because the answer she gave was always the same: I walk. 2, she was, in the polite phrasing of the church-going women, not quite herself. In the less polite phrasing of the men at the general store, she was the crazy Doyle woman. Cordelia had never had a conversation with her. She had said good morning once 3 years ago, at the well behind the church. That was the extent of it. Now Hattie Doyle stood on her porch, with a wooden box in her hand, and a look on her face that Cordelia could not read. Cordelia said, "Mrs. Doyle." Hattie said, "You are building a house on the ridge." "Yes." "Out of stone." "Yes." "From the sandstone shelf." "Yes." Hattie nodded. Once, she lifted the wooden box. She said, "May I come in?" Cordelia stepped back. Hattie came in. She set the box on the kitchen table. She did not look at Wesley, who was sitting by the stove pretending to whittle a stick. She did not look at the loaf of bread rising under the cloth. She looked at Cordelia. She said, "I have watched you for 2 weeks. From where?" "From the eastern ridge. I walk there most mornings." "I did not see you." "No one sees me." Cordelia did not know what to say. Hattie touched the box. She said, "This belonged to my husband, Fenwick Doyle, dead a long time now." She lifted the lid. Cordelia looked inside. Tools, stonemason's tools, a small pointing trowel, a brick hammer with a flat chisel end, a wooden level with a brass bubble tube, pair of iron dividers, a straight edge, a piece of chalked string on a spool, a small square, dark with age. Cordelia did not touch them. She said, "Your husband was a mason." "Yes." "In Bitter Fork?" "No." "In Pennsylvania, before we came west. He built churches, and schoolhouses, and 2 banks. He was a good man at his work." "How did he die?" Hattie's face did not change. She said, "That is not the story I came to tell today." Cordelia was quiet. Hattie said, "I have carried these tools in a box, in the bottom of a cedar chest, for a very long time. I have moved them from Pennsylvania to Ohio, from Ohio to Nebraska, from Nebraska to Wyoming. I have never taken them out. I have never known why I kept them." She looked at Cordelia. "Yesterday, when I was walking, I understood." Cordelia's throat was tight. She said, "Mrs. Doyle, I don't know how to use those tools." "Ido." Cordelia looked at her. Hattie said, "I sat beside him for 15 years, while he worked. I watched him. I listened. I asked. He was patient with me. He answered every question I ever put to him. I know how a trowel wants to be held. I know how a level wants to sit. I know how to true a corner and how to space a course and how to mix a mortar that will not fail when the frost gets into it." She paused. "I never used any of it. Because I am a woman, and because he died, and because after he died, there was no one who would have let me stand on a scaffold in Pittsburgh in 1857 to lay a brick, even if I could." She looked at the tools. "I am 60 years old. My eyes are still good. My hands still work. And you are building a house that my husband would have understood, that my husband would have wanted to help you build. She raised her eyes to Cordelia's. Let me be his hands. Cordelia could not speak, because she was 35 years old, and she had been alone with a 6-year-old for 14 months, and she had learned in that time to expect nothing from anyone. And now this old woman, this woman the town called crazy, was standing in her kitchen, offering the tools of her dead husband, offering to be his hands. Cordelia sat down at the table. She put her face in her hands. Wesley looked up from the stove. He watched his mother cry silently for perhaps 20 seconds. Then Hattie Doyle reached across the table and placed her old thin hand on Cordelia's forearm. She did not speak. She just held it there. Cordelia lifted her face. She said, "When can you start?" Hattie said, "I brought my coat." They worked together for the rest of that week. Cordelia hauled the stones. Hattie set them. Wesley did the mortar. He was, Hattie said quietly to Cordelia on the second day, a serious child. Yes. His father. His father died 14 months ago. I see. Hattie set another stone. She said, "That's about right." Cordelia did not ask what she meant. She thought she knew. Hattie's method was different from Cordelia's. Cordelia had been working from her father's notebook, which was good, but which was a book. A book could not show you how a stone wanted to sit. A book could not show you which side of a rough face should go inward. Hattie could show you. Hattie showed her. By the end of the week, the north wall was up to Cordelia's waist. It looked like a wall a mason had built. Because a mason had. The neighbors kept riding by. Some of them slowed down. One of them, a rancher named Wendell Ostrander, actually stopped his horse and stared for a full minute. He did not say anything. Then he rode on. Cordelia noticed that his horse's trot, on the way back, was slower than on the way out. She did not know what that meant. She was beginning to suspect it meant something. On the last morning of the second week, Hattie stopped work early. She sat on a large flat stone at the edge of the site. Cordelia said, "Are you tired?" "No." "Are you hurt?" "No." Cordelia waited. Hattie said, "There is something I need to tell you, before we go further." "What?" Hattie folded her hands. "You should know that I did not offer to help you, because I am a kind woman." Cordelia sat down beside her. She said, "I don't know if that's true." "It is true. I am not a kind woman. I am a woman who has been alone for a very long time. I have learned to be many things. Kind is not one of them." Cordelia waited. Hattie said, "I offered to help you because 30 years ago in December, I had a son. He was 4. His name was Elias. He was born in Nebraska. We lived in a pine cabin." Cordelia did not move. Hattie said, "He died on the 16th of December. He was warm when he went to bed. He was cold when I woke. Fenwick dug the grave himself, in frozen ground. Took him 3 days." She looked at Cordelia. "When I saw you on the ridge with your son, and I saw what you were trying to do, I understood something for the first time in 30 years. I understood that Elias did not have to be the last little boy who died in a cold house." Cordelia's eyes were wet. She did not wipe them. Hattie said, "Help me finish this, so I can look at his grave without hating myself for the first time since 1857. Cordelia could not speak. She reached over. She took Hattie's old hand in her own split, bandaged one. She held it. She said, "We will finish this." Hattie said, "Yes." They sat there for a long time. The wind moved through the sagebrush. Wesley came around the corner of the wall, holding the mortar paddle in one hand. He said, "The bucket is empty." Cordelia looked at him. She said, "Come here." He came. She pulled him against her side. She did not say why. He did not ask. He leaned against her, and she smelled the clay dust in his hair, and she thought, "Not this one. Not this one. Not this one." The carpenter came in the 3rd week. His name was Bramwell Coyle. He was 71. He had built more than 100 houses in the territory. Most of them were still standing. Some of them were not, and he could tell you in each case why. He rode up on a slow gray gelding, and he did not say hello. He tied his horse. He walked around the site once. He measured with a length of knotted string. He knelt beside the north wall and put his ear against the stone. He stood up. He climbed onto a bench and looked at the roof line. He climbed down. He walked around the site again. Then, and only then, did he look at Cordelia. He said, "Who taught the mason?" Hattie said, "Her husband." Bramwell nodded. He said, "Good hands." Hattie said, "Yes." Bramwell looked at Cordelia. He said, "The walls will stand." "Thank you." "The walls standing is not enough." Cordelia went cold. She said, "Tell me." Bramwell walked to the doorway. He put his hand on the top course of stone. He said, "In a stone wall, if any moisture gets into the joints when it freezes, it can push the mortar out from the middle. Not the outside, the middle, where you cannot see it, where you will not know until the wall moves." Cordelia said, "How do we stop it?" "You drain the roof so no water sits on the top of the stone. You keep the mortar dry while it cures. You cut a channel under the roof line so that any melt runs off before it reaches the wall." "Do we have that channel?" He looked at her. He said, "No." Cordelia sat down on a stone. She said, "How much do we have to take apart?" Bramwell climbed onto the bench again. He looked at the roof for a long time. He said, "Not all of it. A section along the top, about 4 feet down." "When?" "Before the first hard freeze." "How long do we have?" He looked at the western sky. He said, 10 days, maybe 12. Wesley was standing at the corner, watching. He came to his mother. He put his hand on her knee. He said, "Mama, we can take it apart." She almost broke. She did not. She looked up at Bramwell. She said, "Will you show us how?" Bramwell Coyle, 71 years old, master carpenter of the Wyoming Territory, looked down at the widow and the crazy Doyle woman and the 6-year-old boy standing with his hand on his mother's knee. He took off his hat. He said, "Yes, ma'am, I will." The next morning, they started taking the roof apart. They took it apart carefully. Each stone was numbered with a piece of chalk. Bramwell showed Cordelia how to cut the drainage channel. He worked with them for 3 full days. He did not accept payment. On the 3rd afternoon, Hattie walked past Bramwell with an armload of stone and said quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Bramwell answered without looking up, "Because I built a house in 79 that killed a family." He did not say more. Hattie did not ask. On the morning of the 4th day, they finished the drainage channel. Bramwell tested it with a bucket of water. The water ran out at the low end. It did not seep back. He nodded once. He said, "Now the wall will not eat itself." He climbed onto his gray gelding. Before he rode off, he turned in the saddle. He said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I have heard what Silas Vaughn has been saying in town. He is a man who is afraid. I have known him 30 years. He is not evil. He is afraid. But a frightened man with power is more dangerous than an evil one, because he does not know he is doing wrong. Watch him." Cordelia said, "I will." Bramwell tipped his hat. He rode away. That afternoon, they laid the last stone of the eastern wall. Cordelia stepped back to look at the house. It no longer looked like a pile of rocks. It looked like something the prairie had grown around. Low, long half in the hillside. Wesley stood beside her. He said, "It looks like a house." She said, "Yes." He said, "It looks like a hiding house." She looked down at him. She said, "That's exactly what it is." The first snow came that night. Cordelia had known it was coming since noon. At around 9 in the evening, she stepped outside. She wanted to look at the walls. She wanted to see them one more time before they were covered. She carried the lantern with her. She walked to the site. The wind was still down. The first flakes were just beginning. She stood in front of the house. She lifted the lantern. The lantern light moved across the stone, and the stone caught the light in 100 small ways. She was standing there, alone, with the lantern raised. When she felt she was being watched, she turned. Slowly, she stared into the dark. She saw nothing. She stared longer. She saw him, at the fence line, perhaps 30 yards away, not moving, standing very still, so still that, if she had not looked in exactly the right place, she would have missed him. Silas Vaughn. Snow was gathering on his hat brim. He did not lift his hand. He did not call to her. He did not step forward. He just stood, watching. Cordelia did not move. She held the lantern high enough that the light could reach him. She wanted him to know that she had seen him. She wanted him to know that she was not afraid. She was afraid. She just did not want him to know it. For perhaps 10 seconds, they looked at each other across the falling snow. Then Silas Vaughn touched the brim of his hat. He turned. He walked into the dark, and after a moment, she heard the sound of a horse being mounted, and then the slow, steady sound of hooves on frozen ground, moving away. Cordelia stood there for a long time after he was gone. The snow kept falling. The lantern kept burning. She lifted the lantern one more time. She looked at the stone walls in the falling snow. She said out loud to no one, to the walls, to her dead father, and her dead husband, and the little sleeping boy inside the cabin behind her, "Then he will have to come and try." She turned. She walked back to the cabin. She closed the door behind her. Outside, the snow kept falling on the walls of the house, that a widow, a crazy old woman, an aging carpenter, and a 6-year-old boy had spent 3 weeks lifting from a Wyoming hillside. The house did not know yet that its trial was coming. Neither did the widow, but she was, in her own quiet way, getting ready. Cordelia woke before dawn. She did not need a clock. She had not needed a clock in 14 months. Grief woke her, then habit, then lately worry. Today worry. She sat up. She pulled on her father's coat, over her nightdress. She opened the door. The world was white, not deep, 2 inches, 3 maybe. She stepped outside. She walked toward the ridge. She stopped halfway. She stared. She said out loud to no one, "No." She started running, because the stones she had cut yesterday, the stones she had stacked beside the eastern wall, ready for the next course, 20 of them, flat, squared, sorted by size. They were on the ground, kicked over, scattered, some of them broken at the corners, where they had struck each other on the way down. Cordelia stopped at the pile. She stood very still. She looked at the snow. Because the snow was fresh. Because the snow had not been walked on by her. Because there were tracks. Boot tracks. Large ones. Coming in from the fence line, going straight to the pile of stones, circling it once, and going back to the fence line. Even spacing. A calm walk. Not the tracks of a running man. Not the tracks of a man in a hurry. The tracks of a man who had come here, quietly, in the night, kicked over her work, and walked back to his horse. Cordelia knelt in the snow. She touched one of the broken stones. She did not cry. She thought, "He came here in the dark. He came here after I went to bed. He walked through my yard. He walked past the pine cabin, where my son was sleeping. He walked past my window, and he kicked over my stones." He did not say a word. She was still kneeling in the snow when Wesley came out of the cabin. He was in his coat and his boots. He was holding a piece of bread. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the pile. He looked at the tracks. He looked at his mother. He said, "Someone came." Cordelia said, "Yes. In the night. Yes. They knocked over the stones. Yes." Wesley's small face went still. He said, "Who?" Cordelia looked at him. She did not answer. She said, "It doesn't matter who." He said, "Yes, it does." "No. Mama." "Wesley." She stood. She brushed the snow off her knees. She said, "Come here." He came. She knelt back down so that her face was level with his. She put both her hands on his shoulders. She said, "Listen." He listened. She said, "Some people are going to try to make us stop." He said, "Why?" "Because we are doing something they don't understand. And when people don't understand something, sometimes they get afraid. And when they get afraid, they do things they should not do." He said, "That's stupid." She almost smiled. She said, "Yes, it is." She said, "But we are not going to be stupid back." He looked at her. He said, "What are we going to do?" She said, "We are going to stack them up again." He said, "Right now." She said, "Right now." He nodded. He put his piece of bread in his coat pocket. He walked to the pile. He bent down. He picked up the first stone he could lift. He carried it 3 feet. He set it down. He went back for another. Cordelia watched him for a moment. Then she picked up a larger stone. They worked in silence. By the time the sun came, over the ridge the pile was standing again. Wesley wiped his nose on his sleeve. He said, "Mama." "Yes. If he comes back and does it again." Cordelia looked at him. He said, "Do we stack them again?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Every time?" She said, "Every time." He nodded. He said, "Okay." Hattie arrived at 8. She did not need to be told. She walked into the yard. She saw the tracks. She saw the chipped stones. She saw the way Cordelia was holding her hammer, a little too tight. She set down her wooden box. She said, "Which direction did he come from?" Cordelia said, "East fence." Hattie nodded. She said, "Do you want me to speak to him?" Cordelia looked at her. She said, "No." "Why not?" "Because if you speak to him, he learns that we are afraid. And if he learns we are afraid, he will come back." Hattie considered this. She said, "You are not wrong." Bramwell came in the afternoon. He looked at the tracks. He said one word. He said, "Silas." Cordelia did not confirm it. She did not deny it. Bramwell said, "Do you want me to have a word?" She said, "No." He said, "A man who does this at night will do worse in a week." She said, "I know." He said, "Then let me talk to him." She said, "If a man tears down your work in the dark, and you send another man to speak to him about it, the first man will hear that you needed help. And he will remember that you needed help. And the next thing he does will be worse." Bramwell was quiet. He said, "You have thought about this?" She said, "I have thought of nothing else since sunrise." He nodded once. He picked up a stone. He did not speak again for 2 hours. They worked through the day. The eastern wall rose 2 more feet. The rain came on the second Monday of November. It was a cold rain, the kind that soaks into wool in seconds and does not come out until the wool is over a fire. Came down for 6 hours without stopping. The wind pushed it sideways. Cordelia and Hattie worked in it for the first hour. Then Wesley started coughing. Cordelia looked at him. He was standing by the mortar bucket, holding the paddle in one small red hand. His hair was flat against his forehead. His cheeks were red. His nose was running. He coughed again. Sounded wet. Cordelia dropped the trowel. She said, "Inside." Wesley said, "I'm fine. Now." She took him by the shoulders. She marched him back to the pine cabin. She peeled off his wet clothes. She dressed him in dry ones. She wrapped him in a quilt. She sat him beside the stove. He kept coughing. Not hard. Not yet. But the wet kind. The kind that meant something was starting. Hattie followed them into the cabin. She said, "How long has he been outside today?" "Since 7. 6 hours." "Yes." Hattie said, "Cordelia." Cordelia said, "I know." Hattie said, "Sit with him. I will finish the seam we started." Cordelia looked at her. She had been ready for a scolding. She got kindness instead. She said, "Thank you." Hattie went back out into the rain. By evening, Wesley was hot. Not fevered dangerously. Fevered. Cordelia sat beside him on the cot. She thought, I did this. I made him work in the cold. I did not send him inside soon enough. His father is dead. His grandfather is dead. His mother is going to bury him at the base of the ridge, and it will be her fault. Wesley opened his eyes. He said, Mama. She said, Yes. He said, Don't be sad. She said, I am not sad. He said, Yes, you are. She said, How can you tell? He said, You have your sad hands. Cordelia looked down. She had not noticed. She had been holding one of her own hands with the other, squeezing it, hard enough to hurt. She let go. Around 8 in the evening, there was a knock at the door. Cordelia opened it. Hattie stood there. She had her wooden walking stick in one hand and a small burlap bag in the other. Her hair was wet through. Her coat was soaked. Cordelia said, You went home. Hattie said, I went home to get medicine. She came in. She set the burlap bag on the table. She took out 3 small jars. She took out a bundle of dried plants tied with string. She said, Mullein, for the lungs. Willow bark, for the fever. Mint, because a boy who is sick will drink mint before he drinks mullein. She made the tea. She sat down on the edge of the cot. She said, Wesley. He opened his eyes. He said, Miss Hattie, I have something for you to drink. Tastes bad. The honey helps. How bad? Very bad. Okay. He drank it. He made a face. He drank the rest anyway. Within 10 minutes he was asleep. Hattie sat with Cordelia at the kitchen table. The lamp burned low. Then Hattie said, I need to tell you something more. Cordelia waited. Hattie said, When Elias got sick, Fenwick was gone. He had gone to Omaha for supplies. He was supposed to be back in 6 days. He was gone for 11. There was a storm on the plains, and the road was closed, and he could not send word. She paused. I was alone with Elias for 11 days. In a pine cabin. In November. In Nebraska. I ran out of firewood on the 8th day. I burned the chair. I burned the small table. I burned the door of the cupboard. I burned everything I could burn, without burning the walls themselves. She said, I kept him warm. For 11 days. When Fenwick came home on the 12th day, Elias was thin, and he was pale and he was coughing. But he was alive. She said, The cough had started on the 6th day. I did not do anything about it. Because I did not know what to do. She looked at Cordelia. He died on the 16th of December. 10 days after Fenwick came home. She said, Fenwick did not speak to me for 2 months after. He was not angry at me. He was angry at himself. He was angry at the storm, but he did not speak. She said, I am telling you this, because I want you to understand. When I saw you on the ridge 4 weeks ago with your 6-year-old boy, I saw myself. I saw myself in 1857. She looked at Cordelia. Do not let me watch another little boy die in a cold house. Please. Cordelia said, I won't. Hattie said, I know you won't. They sat there. The rain kept falling outside. Wesley kept breathing on the cot. 2 women, 135, 160, held hands across a pine table in a widow's kitchen, in November of 1887, and neither one of them said another word for a long time. Because there were not any more words that needed saying. Wesley's fever broke on Wednesday. He woke coughing, but the cough was drier. His eyes were clear. He asked for bread. Cordelia gave him bread. She held him against her side, and she felt his small, solid weight against her ribs. They moved into the stone house in the first week of December. It was not finished on the inside. The floor was still packed earth. The interior walls were rough, but the roof was closed. The drainage channel was cut. The vents were in place. The stove was set into the deep, narrow hearth that Hattie had built to the exact dimensions in Cordelia's father's notebook. They moved in with 2 chairs, a table, the cedar chest, 3 quilts, Wesley's carved wooden horse, and the notebook. They left the pine cabin standing. They did not say goodbye to it. Cordelia paused in the doorway on the last trip. She looked at the iron stove. She looked at the corner where Wesley had slept. She looked at the peg, where Josiah's coat had once hung. She closed the door. She did not lock it. The first night in the stone house, she lit 4 pieces of pine. 4. She let the flames build. She let them settle. She banked the coals. She watched the back wall of the hearth warm slowly, the way her father's notebook said it would, the heat moving into the stone the way water moves into dry earth. Slow, even, deep. She went to bed at 10. She waited to be cold. She did not get cold. 2 in the morning, she woke. She held her hand out from under the quilt. The air was cool, not cold, cool. She sat up. She walked to the hearth. She put her hand on the back wall of the fireplace. The stone was warm, not hot, not cool, warm. She stood there in her nightdress in the middle of the night in December, with her palm on a warm stone wall, and she thought, he was right. Papa, you were right. In the morning, the thermometer that Bramwell had lent her read 61. Outside it was 17. Wesley climbed down from the loft. He walked to the fireplace. He put both his small palms flat against the warm back wall. He said, "It worked." She said, "Yes." He said, "You did it." She said, "We did it." He said, "No, Mama." He said, "You did it." She had to turn away. Over the next week, people started noticing. They noticed the smoke. Not because there was a lot of it, because there was not. In Bitter Fork in December, a pine log cabin ran its stove hot for 18 hours a day. Smoke rose thick and constant from every chimney. From the stone house, smoke rose in a thin, steady line for a few hours, after sunrise, and then again for a few hours in the evening, and the rest of the day it barely showed. A woman named Mrs. Blackburn was the first to say something out loud. She said, "Have you seen the Whitmore chimney?" Someone said, "What about it?" She said, "It doesn't smoke." By Friday, 3 women had walked past the Whitmore place on invented errands. 2 of them had looked in through the small south window. One of them had seen Cordelia and Wesley sitting at the table eating supper, with a very small fire in the hearth, and the thermometer on the wall reading 64. She told her husband. Her husband told his brother. His brother told Silas Vaughn. Silas Vaughn said, "That's not possible." But that night, Silas Vaughn stood on his own porch in his own coat, and he looked across the valley at the thin line of smoke rising from the ridge where the Whitmore widow had built her stone house. He watched it for a long time. He did not say anything. He went back inside. His wife, Marjorie, was sitting by their stove. She was wrapped in a shawl. The stove was red hot. The room was cold. Their youngest son, an 11-year-old named Peter, was coughing in the back bedroom. He had been coughing for 3 weeks. Silas stood in the doorway. Marjorie looked up. She said, "Silas." He said, "What?" She said, "How much wood is in the shed?" He said, "Enough." She said, "For how long?" He said, "Long enough." She said, "Silas." He said, "Marjorie, enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the stove. She said quietly, "I want to go see her." Silas said, "No." She said, "Silas." He said, "I said no." She said, "Peter is coughing." He said, "Peter has a cold." She said, "He has had it 3 weeks." He said, "Children get colds." She said, "In a house that is not warm enough, they get worse ones." Silas turned on her. He said, "You will not go to that woman's house." Marjorie Vaughn looked at her husband. She did not raise her voice. She said, "You are afraid of her." Silas said, "I am not afraid of anything." Marjorie said, "Yes, you are." He stared at her. He walked out. He slammed the door. The next afternoon, when Silas was out on the range checking cattle, Marjorie Vaughn put on her coat. She walked out of the ranch house. She saddled a horse. She rode east. She rode alone. She rode without telling anyone. Cordelia was inside when Marjorie arrived. She heard the horse. She looked out the small window. She saw a woman she did not know, dismounting. She opened the door. Marjorie stood there. She was smaller than Cordelia expected. Silas was a large man. His wife was not. She was thin, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes that looked tired in the way that a person looked tired when they had been afraid for a long time. She said, "Mrs. Whitmore." Cordelia said, "Mrs. Vaughn." Marjorie said, "May I come in?" Cordelia stepped back. Marjorie came in. She stopped just inside the door. Marjorie looked at the thermometer on the wall. She looked at the small fire in the deep, narrow hearth. She looked at Wesley, who was sitting on the floor by the fire, carving something with a small, dull knife his mother had let him have, and who was in his shirt sleeves. Not a coat. Shirt sleeves. In December. In Wyoming. Marjorie Vaughn put her hand on the stone wall next to her. She left it there. She did not move for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Oh." She said, "Oh, my lord." Cordelia said, "Please, sit down." Marjorie sat.
Cordelia pouretea.
Marjorie took it in both hands. She held it against her chest. She said, "My son is sick." Cordelia said, "I heard." Marjorie said, "He is 11. His name is Peter. He has been coughing for 3 weeks. My husband keeps the stove red every night. Every night. He burns 2 cords a week. The bedrooms are still cold." She paused. "My husband will not admit that our house cannot hold heat." She looked at the fire. "He would rather burn every tree in the valley than admit it." They sat. Marjorie drank her tea. She looked around the room. She said, "How much would have you burned this week?" Cordelia said, 22 pieces. Marjorie said, "This week?" "Yes." Marjorie closed her eyes. She said, "My husband burned 22 pieces yesterday." She reached into her coat. She took out a small burlap sack. She set it on the table. She said, "Flour. From our stores. I took it this morning. I did not tell him. I will not tell him." Cordelia said, "You do not need to give me anything." Marjorie said, "Yes."
Ido.
She said, "Because I cannot say to you what I want to say. I cannot say, I am sorry my husband has said the things he has said. I cannot say, I am sorry someone came here in the dark and kicked over your stones. I cannot say, I am sorry that this whole town has laughed at you for 4 months." She looked at Cordelia. "But I can bring you flour." Cordelia's eyes were wet. She said, "Marjorie." Marjorie said, "Please, do not tell anyone I came." Cordelia said, "I won't." Marjorie stood. She looked one more time at the room. She said, "You have a good boy." Cordelia said, "Thank you." Marjorie said, "I hope my son is a good boy too, when he grows, if he grows." She turned. She walked out. She mounted her horse. She rode west, back toward the Vaughn ranch, and she did not look behind her. Cordelia stood in the doorway. She watched Marjorie ride out of sight. She sat down at the table. She put her hand on the burlap sack of flour. She said, out loud to no one, "Something is going to happen." The sky changed on the 20th of December. Cordelia noticed it at noon. The sun had been out at breakfast. By 10 it was behind thin high cloud. By noon the cloud was thick, and it was low, and it had the color of iron. The wind had died. The horses in the near field were standing still. Cordelia stopped with a wet shirt in her hands. She looked west. Along the low line of mountains something was building. A wall of gray that was rising up the western sky the way a curtain rises on a stage. She said, "Wesley." He answered from the doorway, "Yes. Come here." He came. She pointed west. He said, "Is that a storm?" She said, "Yes." He said, "A bad one?" She said, "I think so." Then Cordelia said, "Bring in the wood from the pile." He said, "All of it." She said, "All of it." He went. She went to the small barn. She checked the water. She went to the pump. She filled 2 barrels. She dragged them one at a time into the stone house. Wesley brought in wood. He carried 3 pieces at a time, then 2, then 1. His arms were tired. He did not stop. By 4 in the afternoon the wood was inside. The water was inside. The barn was closed. Cordelia stood in the yard. She looked west. The wall of gray was closer now. It had swallowed the mountains. She turned to go inside. She stopped, because a horse was coming up the road. Fast. Bramwell Coyle. His gray gelding was lathered. He came into the yard at a hard trot. He reined in. He did not dismount. He said, "Cordelia." She said, "How bad?" He said, "The barometer at the telegraph office fell 4 points in 6 hours. The freighter from Laramie came in an hour ago." He said, "The temperature west of the pass is dropping 30 degrees behind the front." She said, "When?" He said, "By dark." She said, "You should get home." He said, "Cordelia." She said, "Yes." He said, "The Vaughn boy, Peter. His cough turned bad last night. Marjorie has been up with him for 2 days. This morning she came to my door. She said Silas will not send for a doctor, because there is no doctor to send for. She said her boy is not going to make it through this storm in that house." Cordelia went very still. She said, "How do you know she is right?" Bramwell said, "Because I built that house 12 years ago, before I knew what I was doing. I know exactly what will happen to it when the wind hits it from the west at 30 below." Cordelia looked at the wall of gray. She looked at her own stone house. She looked at Wesley, who had come to the doorway and was standing there in his coat. She looked back at Bramwell. She said, "I am going to their house." Bramwell said, "Silas will not let you in." She said, "Then I will stand at his door until he does." Bramwell said, "Cordelia." She said, "Bramwell." He said, "You cannot walk. You will freeze." She said, "Then lend me your horse." He looked at her. He said, "Take him." He swung down. She swung up. She turned in the saddle. She said, "Wesley." Wesley came running. She knelt down from the saddle. She caught his shoulders. She said, "You stay here with Mr. Coyle. He will stay with you until I come back. Do you understand?" Wesley said, "Are you going to be okay?" Cordelia said, "Yes." She said, "But listen, if I am not back by dark, you bar the door. You do not open it for anyone. Not for me, not for Mr. Coyle, not for anyone. Do you understand?" Wesley said, "Yes." She said, "You are the man of the house until I get back." He said, "I know." She kissed his forehead. She said, "I love you." He said, "I love you too. Come back." She wheeled the horse. She rode west, toward the wall of gray, toward the Vaughn ranch, toward the man who had said, in front of witnesses, that he would tear her walls down with his own 2 hands, toward the man whose son was coughing in a bedroom that could not be warmed. The first hard flakes hit her face before she reached the fence line. She did not slow down. Behind her, in the doorway of the stone house, Wesley stood beside Bramwell Coyle, and he watched his mother disappear into the whitening field, and he did not cry, because he was 6 and he was his mother's son. He watched until he could not see her. He watched a little longer. Then Bramwell put a hand on his shoulder. Bramwell said, "Inside, son." Wesley said, "Okay." They went inside. Wesley barred the door. Behind them, on the western horizon, the wall of gray reached the sun, and it swallowed it, and the light went out of the sky, as if a lamp had been blown. Cordelia rode into the wall of white. The snow was not falling. It was flying, sideways, straight into her face, straight into the horse's face. The gelding did not want to go west, and she did not blame him, and she did not care. She kept his head pointed. She kept her heels down. She kept riding. The world went to gray, then to gray-white, then to just white. She could see the ground for maybe 15 feet. Beyond that, nothing. If she missed the Vaughn gate, she would die. She knew that. She kept riding. The temperature dropped as she rode. She felt it. In her breath. Her breath came out and did not become steam. It became a thin white powder that fell to the horse's neck like dust. She thought, he said he would tear down my walls. He came in the night and he kicked over my stones. And now his son is dying, and I am the only person in this valley who has a house that can save him. She kept riding. She found the road. She found the gate. She rode into the yard. She dismounted. Her legs did not want to work. She held onto the saddle horn for a moment. Her legs came back. She led the horse to the porch. She did not go to the front door. She went around to the side to the kitchen door. She did not knock. She opened it. She walked in. Marjorie Vaughn was at the sink. She turned. She stared at Cordelia. Snow was on Cordelia's shoulders. Snow was in her hair. Ice was in her eyebrows. Her mouth had cracked at both corners from the cold, and there was blood on her lower lip. Marjorie said, "Oh." She said, "Oh no." Cordelia said, "Where is Peter?" Marjorie said, "In the back bedroom." Cordelia said, "Where is Silas?" Marjorie said, "In the parlor." Cordelia walked through the kitchen. She walked into the hall. She walked into the parlor. Silas Vaughn was standing at the window with his back to the room. He was holding a glass in his hand. She said, "Silas." He did not turn. He said, "Get out of my house." She said, "No." He said, "I said get out." She said, "Your son is going to die in this house tonight, and you know it, and I have come to take him where he will not die." Silas turned. Slowly. He was a big man. He was very big when he was angry. He said, "You." She said, "Yes." He said, "You have come to my house." She said, "Yes." He said, "In a blizzard." She said, "Yes." He said, "To take my son." She said, "To save your son." He set down the glass. He walked toward her. She did not move. He stopped 3 feet away. He said, "Get up." She said, "No." He said, "I will put you out." She said, "Then put me out. But your son will still be dying in the back bedroom, and I will be the only person for 100 miles who has a house that can keep him warm through what is coming. And you will remember for the rest of your life that you put me out." Silas Vaughn stared at her. The parlor was very quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked. The wind pushed against the west window. Somewhere in the back of the house, a boy coughed. Silas closed his eyes. He said, "Get out of my house." But he said it differently this time. Not with anger, with something else. Something that sounded, to Cordelia, like a man who was fighting one last time against something he had already lost. She said, "Silas." He opened his eyes. She said, "Your father." He went still. She said, "I know about your father." He said, "You do not know anything about my father." She said, "Bramwell told me this morning. He said your father put every dollar he had into a silver claim that a wandering prospector told him was rich. He said the claim was empty. He said your mother did not survive the winter after. He said you were 15 years old." Silas Vaughn did not speak. Cordelia said, "You did not decide to hate me because I am a woman. You decided to hate me because I looked like the prospector. Because I came into your town with an idea nobody else had, and I said follow me, and you decided before I ever laid a single stone that I was going to kill somebody's mother." She stepped closer. She said, "Silas, look at me." He looked at her. She said, "I am not the prospector. I am a mother. I am the same as your mother. I am doing what she would have done if she had known. And your boy is in the back room coughing. And I have a warm wall 3 miles east of here." And I have come, through a blizzard on another man's horse to ask you to let me bring him to it. She took a breath. She said, please. Silas Vaughn's face did something. It did not soften. It broke. He put a hand on the back of a chair. He said, He said, I have. He could not finish. Marjorie came in behind Cordelia. She had been listening. Of course she had been listening. She came in and she walked past Cordelia, and she stood in front of her husband, and she put her hand flat on his chest. She said, Silas, get the boy. Silas Vaughn, 6'3", 240 pounds, owner of half the cattle in the valley, put his big rough hand over his wife's small one. He said, Marjorie. She said, get the boy. He nodded. He turned. He walked down the hall to the back bedroom. The ride back was worse than the ride out. They wrapped Peter in 3 blankets and a buffalo coat. Silas carried him. Marjorie rode beside them on a bay mare. Cordelia rode ahead on Bramwell's gray. They went single file. The snow was worse now. The wind had picked up. The visibility was down to about 8 feet. Cordelia navigated by the fence line. She counted the posts. 12, 24, 40. When she got to the corner post, she would turn. She got to the corner post. She turned. They rode east. Wesley was watching from the small south window when they came into the yard. The door opened. Bramwell came out. He caught Cordelia's reins. He said, inside. All of you. Now. Silas carried Peter in. Marjorie followed. Cordelia stumbled through the doorway. Bramwell shut the door behind them. The warm air hit them like a wall. Silas Vaughn, who had walked into the stone house prepared to hate every second of it, stopped 3 feet inside the door and did not move. Because his face was wet. The heat had hit the frozen tears on his beard, and they had melted, and they were running down his cheeks like something he could not stop. He looked at Marjorie. Marjorie looked at him. They did not speak. Cordelia said, put him by the hearth. Not too close. Silas put Peter on the pallet Wesley had made ready. Because Wesley was 6. He had known, when he was left alone with Bramwell, that people were going to come. So he had made a pallet. Cordelia knelt beside Peter. She unwrapped the blankets one at a time. The boy's face was gray-blue. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Cordelia said, water. Warm. Not hot. Bramwell was already at the stove. She said, the mullein tea. Do we have any left? Bramwell said, in the jar by the window. She said, make it. Half strength. He is a big boy for 11, but he is weak right now, and I do not want to shock him. Bramwell said, yes. She said, Wesley. Wesley came. He was 6. He was steady. She said, sit on the pallet by his head. Talk to him. Tell him where he is. Tell him he is safe. Do not stop talking. Wesley sat. He said, hi.
I'm Wesley.
You are in my house. My mama is going to make you warm. You do not have to be scared. He said it in a small, serious voice. He kept saying it. Peter's eyes did not open, but his hand moved, found Wesley's small hand, closed around it. Wesley did not let go. She warmed the water. She made a small cup of half-strength mullein tea. She lifted Peter's head. She wet his lips first. Then she gave him a spoonful. Then another. He swallowed. Weakly. But he swallowed. After 20 minutes, his color changed. Not to good. To less bad. Gray-blue became gray. Gray became pale. Pale became something that could be called alive. Silas made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a large man makes when he has been holding something in for 3 weeks, and finally, in the dark warm air of another woman's house, he lets it out. Marjorie put her hand on his back. Silas said, He said, I did this. Marjorie said, no. He said, Marjorie, I did this. I would not let you go for the doctor. I would not let you come to her. Cordelia did not turn around. She kept spooning tea into Peter's mouth. she said, over her shoulder without looking. Silas. He said. Yes, she said. Not tonight. He said. What? She said. Not tonight. There is time for all of that. There will be time tomorrow and the day after. Right now. In this room. Your boy is coming back. Do you understand me? He is coming back. And you do not owe me a speech. You owe him one when he wakes. Silas Vaughn, big rough Silas Vaughn, put his face in his hands. He wept. Then the first hard knock came at the door. Bramwell opened it. Snow blew in. Jonas Beckett. His face cut across the forehead. His wife Clara behind him carrying a 7-year-old girl named Ruth. Jonas said, "The roof." Bramwell said, "Which roof?" Jonas said, "Ours. It went. About an hour ago." Cordelia said, "Put her on the floor by the hearth." Wesley, move over. Make room. Wesley moved over. He was still holding Peter's hand. By 7 there were 12. Old Henry Pike, Mrs. Blackburn and her daughter Alice. By 8 there were 13. A rancher named Cole, the same young rancher who had ridden past 4 weeks ago and laughed at the roof coming apart, arrived at the door with his wife and their 4-month-old baby. He did not speak when he came in. He handed the baby to Marjorie. He walked to the corner. He sat down. He put his face against the wall. He did not move for 20 minutes. Cole was the one who had laughed the loudest at the store when Silas had said Cordelia would kill her son. He was crying against the wall. Cordelia saw it. She did not say anything. She looked away. She kept working. The chimney kept drawing. The vents kept working. The stone walls, which had absorbed heat for a week, gave it back slowly, evenly all through the night. The thermometer at 9 in the evening with 13 people inside read 66. 66. While outside, the temperature dropped through 0 and through -10 and through -20. At 1:30 in the morning, the first sound came. A deep crack. Not close. Cordelia sat up. Another crack. Louder. Silas was awake beside her. He had come to the door without a sound. He said, "The cabin." She said, "Yes." Then something struck the door. Not hard. A thud. Cordelia stared at the door. Silas said, "Something is out there." She said, "It is a piece of the cabin." Another thud. Then another. Then a heavier one. The door shook. Silas dragged a heavy timber beam from the corner and jammed it from the floor to the latch. Then they waited. One more time something struck the door. Hard. The latch jumped. The timber brace held. Everything went quiet. By dawn the wind had changed. Between the gusts, the world was almost quiet. Cordelia opened her eyes. Wesley was curled against her side. Peter was on the other side of Wesley, still holding his hand. The thermometer read 64. Everyone was alive. Everyone. Cordelia got to the door. She lifted the bar. She pushed. The door opened 6 inches. Then stopped. She looked. Snow. Piled against the outside, for feet deep. And, in the snow, wedged against the door, a piece of wood. She could not see all of it. Just an edge. Painted. Old paint. Peeling. She said, "Silas." He was awake. He came. Together they worked the door open. They pushed the snow. They pulled the piece of wood. Came free. They dragged it inside. Fell onto the floor with a heavy sound. Cordelia stared at it. She said, "Oh." She knelt down. She put her hand on it. Silas said, "What?" She said, "This is my kitchen door." She said, "This is the door of the pine cabin." She said, "Josiah built this." She ran her hand over the wood. She felt the shape of it. The 2 boards. The cross brace. The old iron hinges. She turned it over. She saw it. On the inside face. Where nobody would ever see. Under the paint that had been put on 10 years ago, that had cracked and peeled through 6 winters. There were letters cut into the wood. Not painted. Carved. Deep. Careful. The way a man carves when he means it. She leaned close. She read. She read them again. She sat back on her heels. She put her hand over her mouth. Silas knelt beside her. He looked at the letters. He read them out loud, slowly, in a voice that was not quite steady. Cordelia of mine, this roof is not enough for you. One day I will build the house you deserve.
J. 1885.
Silas stopped reading. The room, which had been slowly waking around them, went very quiet. Cordelia sat on the floor beside the door of her old kitchen, with her hand over her mouth, and she cried. Not loud. Silent. The tears just came, because for 14 months she had thought that Josiah did not know, that he had never seen what she saw, that he had built the cabin in a hurry because he did not understand what winter would do to it, and because he had died before he could learn. But he had known. He had known in 1885, 2 years before he died. He had known, and he had not told her, and he had carved a promise into the inside of a kitchen door where nobody would ever see it, because he was going to build her the house someday. And when he built it, she would have opened the old door, and she would have seen the promise, and she would have known. He had never built the house, but he had known. Silas Vaughn, on his knees on the floor of Cordelia's stone house, looked at the carved letters, and he looked at Cordelia's face, and he did something none of the men in Bitter Fork had ever seen him do. He removed his hat. He was inside. He was not wearing a hat. He touched his own head, where the hat would have been. He said, "Ma'am." Cordelia looked at him. He said, "I am sorry." She said, "I know." He said, "Not to you." She said, "What?" He said, "I am not saying I am sorry to you." He looked at the carved letters. He said, "I am saying it to him." He put his hand on the door. He said, "Josiah Whitmore, I did not know you well. I said things about your wife I had no right to say. I stood in a store, and I said your boy would die because his mother was foolish. And it turned out your wife was building the house you had promised her. And it turned out she was doing it right. And it turned out my son is alive this morning because of what she built. And He stopped. He said, "I am sorry." He said it to the door. He said it to the man who had been dead 14 months. Then he put his hat back on his head. He stood up. He walked to the hearth. He sat down beside his sleeping son. He did not speak for a long time. Cordelia stayed on the floor by the door. She kept her hand on the carved letters. She sat there a long time too. By noon, the storm was over. The sky was hard blue. The temperature was still below zero. The world outside was silent under 3 feet of new snow. Cordelia opened the door properly. She stepped outside. She looked west. The pine cabin was gone. Not damaged. Gone. Half of the roof lay upside down against the north wall of the stone house. One wall had collapsed into itself. The chimney leaned at a wrong angle. Pieces of timber were scattered across the white field for 200 yards. The stone house was untouched. Behind her, one by one, people came out. Jonas Beckett with his arm around Clara. Ruth walking on her own between them.
Cole, silent, hat in hand.
Mrs. Blackburn and Alice. Old Henry Pike. Marjorie with the baby. Silas came out last, carrying Peter, who was awake and blinking in the hard sunlight. Peter said weakly, "Papa." Silas said, "Yes, son." Peter said, "Where are we?" Silas said, "We are at Mrs. Whitmore's house." Peter said, "Is she the one you were mad at?" Silas closed his eyes for a second. He said, "Yes, son." Peter said, "Why?" Silas said, "Because I was wrong." Peter looked at Cordelia. He said, "Thank you, ma'am." Cordelia knelt down. She smoothed the boy's hair. She said, "You are welcome, Peter." She stood up. Hattie Doyle came up the road on foot in the afternoon. She had walked 3 miles through fresh snow with her walking stick and her wooden box of tools. She saw the collapsed cabin. She saw the intact stone house. She saw the people gathered in the yard. She saw Peter wrapped in a blanket in his father's arms. She did not need anyone to explain. She walked up to Cordelia. She looked at her. She said, "You did it." Cordelia said, "We did it." Hattie said, "Yes, but you did the hard part." Then Hattie Doyle, 60 years old, small and thin, and proud, opened her arms. Cordelia stepped into them. The two women stood there in the yard, holding each other, while 13 people watched. Hattie said, quietly, into Cordelia's ear, "Elias would be proud." Cordelia said, quietly back, "So would Fenwick." They stood a while longer. Then they went inside. The spring came late in Bitter Fork that year. By April, the ground was soft. By June, 5 stone foundations were being cut on hillsides around the valley. Silas Vaughn hauled the first load of stone in his own wagon. He never drank liquor again after the night of the storm. He said when anyone asked that he had used up his lifetime allowance in one glass. Bramwell Coyle taught the men. Hattie taught the women. Cordelia moved between the sites with her father's notebook. Wesley, who was 7 now, walked beside her carrying a small square Bramwell had made for him. He would squat down and look along a wall and say, "Mama, this one is off." She would look. He would be right. Every time. Marjorie Vaughn brought bread to every site every morning. She and Cordelia never became close exactly. But every Sunday morning of every year that followed, a jar of preserves appeared on the Vaughn porch, and a fresh loaf of bread appeared on the Whitmore door. Neither woman ever spoke of it. Both women counted on it. By 1890, 17 stone houses stood in Bitter Fork. Every one of them, in December at 3 in the morning, could keep a child warm on 4 pieces of pine. Hattie Doyle died in 1901. She was in her own bed, in her own small stone and timber house on the eastern edge of town. Wesley was at her bedside. So was Cordelia. Hattie had held Cordelia's hand at the end. She had said, "Tell him." Cordelia had said, "Tell him what?" Hattie had said, "Tell Elias I am coming." Then she had smiled. Then she had gone. Cordelia lived in the stone house for 51 more years. She died in the winter of 1938, in her own bed, with the wall behind her still warm, because Wesley had lit the fire that evening. Wesley was 57 then. He had never left Bitter Fork. He had married and had 3 children. He had become, in his own quiet way, the man Bramwell Coyle had been. He taught 2 generations of Bitter Fork boys how to true a corner and set a course. The first stone house is still standing. It stands today in a field east of what used to be Bitter Fork. 6 of the original stone houses are still occupied. 3 are used as barns. 2 are empty but roofed. And the first one, the one on the ridge, still stands. A great-great-grandchild of Wesley Whitmore lives in it now. Above the fireplace, mounted on the wall, is an old painted door. On the inside face, carved deep, are the words a young husband cut for a young wife in 1885. "Cordelia of mine, this roof is not enough for you. One day I will build the house you deserve."
J. 1885.
He had not built it. She had, and she had built it for him, and for their son, and for a boy named Peter who lived to be 80, and for a woman named Hattie who died smiling, and for every child in every winter, for as long as the stone would hold. Which was, in the end, the same thing as building a house that would do the work of love. Long after the ones who had built it were gone.